altitude. I saw, International Space Station, you have called it. How high should this float above the Earth or all around the Earth? And how high and low will the temperature be up there? Quetzal says the Very Large Station will orbit the Earth at about 400 kilometers of altitude, and at this altitude, there prevails a positive temperature of about 120 degrees and a negative temperature of about 150 degrees, if I am not mistaken. Billy says, aha, so there can also be mistakes with you. But tell me, when I took the deep sea tour with you, there I saw life forms in the deepest depths, which will certainly still remain invisible and unexplainable to our deep-sea researchers and scientists for a long time, as this will also be the case for many of the giant animals that live in higher and middle sea depths, as for example the giant snakefish which look like giant eels, which are up to 15 meters long, as you said, then likewise the giant sharks that are up to 14 meters long and which have such large mouths that one might think that a third of the fish come from these. But then, there were still the giant beasts, which you called deep sea eels and which had a kind of tentacle mane and which, once they are fully grown and as you also explained, can be up to 18 to 22 meters long. I was also impressed by the giant jellyfish, whose catching arms or tentacles were about 45 meters long, according to your explanation. Also those monstrous predatory sharks were to be regarded as enormous, which you described as rapacious and predatory creatures. And when I think that these fish, according to your data, were 10, 12, and 14 meters long, then one could learn fear if one would face these beasts under other and unprotected circumstances, than just in such a way as we were protected in your ship. But that there are deep-sea squid, which have long, delicate, and fine tentacles, several of which you also let me see and observe, of this I also knew nothing, as well as not of the existence of all the other deep-sea creatures or deep-sea life forms. And here, I wrote down the name that you told me in reference to that beast that made a strange impression on me and concerning which you explained that it concerns a distant descendant form of the Carcharodon megalodon, as you dictated its name to me. Even more could be said of what was experienced and seen, but I want to concern you with the question, namely how many deep-sea creatures of every kind and size can one still reckon, which have remained undiscovered up to now? If one can attach a number to this at all. Quetzal says that is also unknown to us, but we estimate that in the deep sea of the earthly oceans, about 12 million undiscovered genera and species of organisms still exist, and the number of individual species, according to their size, is probably in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or in the millions with the biggest and largest creatures, and in the tens of millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions, up to innumerableness with the smallest and tiniest life forms. Billy says with the innumerable life forms, it probably concerns microorganisms and so on, right? And how large or tiny are they, for example, in relation to a fine tip of a hair? Quetzal says yes, I speak of microorganisms. However, these stand in no comparison in their size to a hair's tip because they are so tiny that billions of specimens could be found on such. Billy says then these are probably thermal microorganisms, that is thermal bacteria or even thermophilic microorganisms, as you and Patar once called these super small creatures, if I remember correctly. Unfortunately, I must inquire into this, for since my breakdown in 1982, I no longer have the memory capacity as before. You know that I am still working up what was lost and no longer reliably recall everything that I knew before. Quetzal says you remember very well. You said everything that is to be said. A further explanation from me isn't necessary. Billy says also good. Then another question about the large and giant deep-sea life forms, such as the giant sharks, giant squid, giant eels, and giant snakefish, etc. For centuries, Stories from sailors wander through the world like ghosts, which describe sea monsters and deep-sea monsters that are said to have attacked ships on the seas and that have even sunk these and that also should have killed sailors. Is this actually somewhat true, or is it all just storytelling? Quetzal says the stories have their validity, even if many things seem implausible due to a lot of exaggeration. Of course, there are also many invented stories that have no truth content at all, so not everything that has been and that will be told can be accepted as given, as this is also the case with respect to many other things. Billy says, so I imagined, yes. But it is also clear to me that various stories are just so-called sailors' yarn, as this also applies to the alleged ship's kobold as well as to the unbelievable stories regarding St. Elmo's fire, which there actually is, however, through the atmospheric electricity. But now a question that demands your doctor's knowledge: dyslexia, which is also designated as a writing disorder or orthography disorder, if I am correctly oriented, is this inheritable? Quetzal says that is correct. Dyslexia is inheritable through genetic misinformation or genetic deformation, that is genetic damage. Billy says I was asked about the apartheid system in South Africa and about the civil rights activist, Nelson Mandela, who has been imprisoned there for many years because he made himself unpopular in the political struggle against the oppression and was condemned as our public enemy to lifelong imprisonment. How long will the oppressive apartheid system continue to exist, if it is abolished at all, and Nelson Mandela, will he ever be free again? Have you had a look into the future in relation to this? Quetzal says Nelson Mandela will be released into freedom again after 27 years of imprisonment, through the intervention of an authoritative Swiss diplomacy, on the 11th of February, 1990. At a later time, and to be sure, in the month of April, 1994, the system of racial segregation that has existed since 1948 will be cancelled and placed permanently out of power. In the same year, Nelson Mandela will be proclaimed as the President of the Republic of South Africa, but he will only hold the office of President until 1999 and will resign at his own desire. Billy says then there are, therefore, only a few years of the terror of the whites against the various non-whites in South Africa. That's good to hear. Such progress is praiseworthy. But now, 2 questions about the colors of the universe. You surely remember Professor Janowski, the astrophysicist. We've already discussed the question of his once. He asked what original color did the material universe, that is the material creation belt, exhibit, what color followed thereafter, what is given today, and what colors will be given in the future and what will be given with the contraction of the universe. He also asks how these colors can be calculated and whether this is possible at all or whether the earthly scientists of astrophysics are presently in a position to do this or will be in the future. Quetzal says I want to answer the first question first. The color of the universe can only be calculated in accordance with all sources of light of all galaxies in the form of a combination of the same, and to be sure, while a so-called cosmos spectrum or universe spectrum is created from this. This is an average value which isn't visible to the human eye and which results from combinations of young blue and old red stars of the galaxies as well as from nebulous formations and gas clouds of our cosmic form. From this, it also follows that the color of the universe doesn't always remain the same but varies, because depending on the overall mass and luminosity of all sources of light, the color changes. During the formation of the universe, the greatest brightness was given a beaming, bright, white Sahara light that resulted from the Big Bang explosion. Then came the blue phase of the galaxy's development and stars' development, etc., from which the material form of the present universe developed, which exhibits a beige color that, over the course of time and evolutionary change, will be followed by the colors of turquoise, green, red, and yellow. So since the origin of the universe, there is the following series of colors up to its end. 1. Beaming, bright, white Sahara light. Big Bang phase. 2. Beaming blue. Existence development phase. 3. Beige. First existence phase. 4. Turquoise. Second existence phase. 5. Green. Third existence phase. 6.